Yeah.
All right, I think we should be okay to start now.
Yes.
And yeah. All right, so good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this webinar today. We really appreciate it. My name is Najd Raiisi. I'm a decarbonization engineer by practice, and I do sustainability work at Zeroe as a consultant or delivery and slash implementation person. And I'll hand it over to Piyush to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Piyush Harwani. I am a mechanical engineer from background. I'm also a carbon accounting professional and a certified energy manager. I've done over 100 audits in the region in terms of carbon and energy. And we're going to share what we have learned about the subject.
So this is episode 2 of a series of different webinars that we're conducting at Zeroe. And today's session is about building a sustainability data system that lasts. And so we want to make it very practical, and we've set it up deliberately to be practical and to provide you the tools that you need within your organization as a sustainability practitioner. So just for a bit more context, both Piyush and I actually have done a lot of sustainability work within our organizations before we joined kind of the service provider side. And so these are things that we've had to deal with personally as well. So we're speaking a lot from experience here.
Yeah, there's a lot of pain points from our experience that we're going to pick up on.
Exactly. So today we're going to examine how sustainability data flows across your organization, where it's created, how it's shaped, and how it moves before it gets to you as the sustainability practitioner, so that your reporting decisions are not tied to kind of the end of reporting cycle chaos. And we understand, again, because we've done this ourselves, is that in most organizations, the blocker is not that the teams lack effort or dedication, or even that the organization doesn't have the proper strategy. It's often because of data friction, because numbers move across different teams, across different departments, vendors, portals. So you're dealing with lots of format shifts. And so ownership kind of gets lost across all of that. And we're here to tell you that when you define your flow clearly, you will stop firefighting and will start improving your strategy and improving that strategy cycle after cycle. And in terms of what we'll cover today, okay, I hope everybody can see my screen. In terms of what we'll cover today, we'll start out with the data challenges, because again, we've done this, so we know from firsthand experience how challenging it can be to work on a, let's say, sustainability report. So we'll discuss a lot of that, and we'll give you examples of the data challenges. We'll then give you a tool that will help you diagnose exactly where your flow breaks. And we'll do that by giving you a clear methodology to kind of map out and over time improve your reporting cycle. And we'll also give you a tool called the 3-layer model. And it's, again, a diagnostic tool that helps you pinpoint exactly what's going wrong and why you're feeling so frustrated and why you're having to chase data and people rather than spend that time on analysis. We'll also end with a readiness assessment. So if you think about it from a flow perspective, we'll give you the problem, we'll give you a tool to diagnose the specifics of that problem, and then we'll end with the solution. So what can you do to improve your data systems? And I'd like to take some time here. I think my colleague Lauren will be dropping a link for a sheet for you to fill out, where just look at it, have a read over it. It will go over that 3-layer model, and we'll ask you to think about the most frustrating data point that you have, whether it's energy data, whether it's fugitive emissions, or even scope 3. Think about the data point that's giving you a lot of trouble and try to fill in whatever you can. If not, that's okay. You can fill it in as we go. And if you don't understand everything, that's also okay because it will become more clear as we go through the content. So I'll just give you a couple minutes here to familiarize yourself with that sheet. And I think we're dropping it as a link to Google Docs. So if you can please just download it as a PDF or whatever format you want from that link rather than editing in the link itself. And I'll start in a couple minutes. I'll just give you a couple minutes here to go through it. And also, again, here, as you're filling this out, it doesn't have to be perfect. We want you to actually capture the reality of what you're having to deal with. We're not here to judge. We've dealt with all of this ourselves, and we continue to deal with it with our own clients. So we're not here to judge anybody. This is just a diagnostic tool, and you can keep it for yourself. You don't have to share it with anybody. It's just a tool that will help you out along this process. So as you do that, and again, you don't have to fill everything in, you can keep referring back to it during the session today. I'll hand it over to Piyush to kind of ground the problem that we're all dealing with.
Thank you so much, Najd, for starting this up and guiding people into this. Based on the work we have done, me and Najd, in the past few years, one of the most consistent pattern across every project, whether it's your first GAG inventory or a mature ESG workflow, is that things break at the data level. A significantly large amount of efforts and time goes into just gathering the data, and then it takes another effort to clean it, to make sense out of it, and then you are left with a very small portion of time to actually analyze it, create insights, make decisions. What we have noticed is most teams don't struggle from lack of commitment, but they spend most of their time just handling broken data flows rather than actually driving sustainability initiatives. Uh, and in most organizations, the blocker isn't strategy, it's the data friction. Uh, and To fix this right things, we first need to understand exactly where the friction builds up to actually understand how we can resolve it. Uh, there are actually 3 points in a system where we consistently see frictions build up. And understanding these points help you identify where sustainability data systems need strengthening for you. The first is ingestion, how the data comes in into the system. In most cases, the data is manually, handled. There are Excel sheets, there are PDFs that need to be uploaded. There are attachments. Then there are screenshots at times. Uh, some data systems have automations or they're semi-automated. There's like an ERP system export for some cases, or a portal download, a CSV file, that's transitioned into the system and in a specific time-bound manner. However, what we've noticed is even automation can break if the format changes or there's an access fail, or often there's no consistent channel in terms of standard formats or reliable timings. uh, One site is sending a CSV file while the other site is sending ERP exports, while the other site is silent for 2 months. So there's no standardization across what we have seen in terms of ingesting the right data. If you resolve ingestion, then there's another problem that comes in to a contributor logic, who provides what, when, and how. There is no shared understanding of roles and responsibilities. That's what we have understood while working with multiple organizations. No documentation in some cases defining what to be submit, when, and in what format. Sometimes it depends on person who knows the file, and the person is unavailable. The stream breaks, and even if you are able to resolve this contributor logic, you have another bottleneck, which is validation. Different sites use different formats. For example, a site is using liter, the other site is giving data in gallons, and one site is giving data in tons, while the other site is giving data in kgs. Of inconsistent formatting, missing fields, data duplicates. These are few things which we have actually experienced in our own personal efforts of building decarbonization roadmaps for businesses. And validation often depends on someone actually noticing it by eye, which is not a system. That's just a chance. And there should be a quality control process in place. There should be error handling process in place, which we have not noticed in many entities that we have worked with. We'll actually look at a short case, how it, we can look at one of the cases where we face these problems the most, and that's the HR maze. That's what we call it, HR maze. So the problem with HR, or the data that HR reports, it usually is the workflow data split into different systems. HRIS holds employee address, while the admin manages shuttle services. Fleet across knows fleet management team knows the vehicles, but none of them have a complete data set of knowing usage per employee. You know, con- and then to resolve this, we go for surveys. But in surveys also, contractors are often outside, fall outside the boundaries of surveys, and a lot of businesses don't even track their remote working workforce. So results all that results in fleet emissions misaligned due to incomplete data from the drivers, and occupancy assumptions off because you don't have the actual headcounts of of the people. Here we have an example of two systems giving two different sets of data. System A is giving us data which is full-time for full-time employee and office-based staff. While to get the contractors' data, we have to dive into a different system. Get who are interns, who are consultants, who are working from home, and all those fields. And then we have to compile it together, and that's where the problem is. You taking so much time to gather the data, and then to uh, clean it, and then to analyze it. And it's all reactive. It takes multiple cycles to come to even to a baseline of it. And that's and the truth is, it's not the data that doesn't exist. It's fragmented across teams, and no one has built a structure to stitch it all together. And Nudge will be unpacking how we handle this and what practical solution looks like in the next few slides.
Thank you, Piyush. And I'd like to add here to the case of HR related information. I think oftentimes we have to keep in mind that as the sustainability team or sustainability practitioner, this is your bread and butter. So you know exactly what you want, you know the data that's missing, but you have to keep in mind that when you're dealing with other stakeholders beyond your specific team, there's a lack of kind of information element as well. And so you have to be a bit patient and understand that this might be a certain person's first time even coming across certain data requirements, so ESG disclosures or GHG requirements. And so you're having to spend some time going back and forth and managing your stakeholders as well, which is also frustrating. So like Piyush said, oftentimes it's not that the data is not there. The data we know exists somewhere. It's just fragmented across different systems. So Piyush spoke a lot about the problems, and I'll build on that. And the following is a tool that kind of helps you pinpoint exactly where that data flow breaks. So the 3-layer model is again a diagnostic tool. It helps you understand why a data set is hard to use and where to focus your improvement efforts when you're trying to either build a system from scratch or improve your existing systems. So from our experience, the problem lies either with the source, structure, or access levels. So starting with the source layer, so this is very simply where the data is created, where it originates. So think meters, invoices, different systems such as ERP or SAP or whatever other departments are using. So where is the data is created? That's the raw data in its most original format. Next, we have the structure layer, where data flow can also be broken. And so that deals with how your data is formatted or tagged. And I think the most relevant example here would be units. So how are you classifying your data? What units are you using? If two different systems are categorizing them using different units, you already have a barrier there that breaks your data flow. Another one is how your data is categorized, and I think that we'll touch upon this a bit more when we give you specific examples. So when you're dealing, for example, with finance data, finance might categorize data that serves finance purposes, but when you want to use that same information for ESG analysis, you'll find it a bit hard and you have to do further work yourself because it's not categorized in a way that's useful for you. It's not categorized in a way that allows it to flow across different systems. And then another example in the structure layer is in what format are you saving your files? So when it is created in the source, is it created in a way that helps you export it as an Excel file, or do you have to manually extract it and build a table that you will find in your inbox somewhere? And then finally is the access layer. And within this access layer, I'd also like to discuss the frequency that you receive the data in. And so how you access that data and how frequently are you accessing that data. So for example, if it is created in your ERP system and you receive it as an Excel export, how often are you doing that? Is it on a consistent monthly basis, quarterly basis, or whatever? Or is it or do you receive it once a year whenever you ask for it and you push for it, and then you find it in your inbox? Sometimes an access layer can be automated, so you're pulling data through an API, but oftentimes you also have to keep that in mind and really examine the access layer and in what format are you receiving that data. And so all three layers, have to function well in order for your data flow to be seamless. If there's an issue, and oftentimes if you're just starting out your GHG or ESG reporting journey, the problem might be across all three layers, which is okay. And we want to assure you that you can still deal with that. But sometimes if you have a more mature system, then really the pain points are tied to one particular layer. And so let's say if you're having issues with the way that the data is categorized, so the fix is as easy as asking or standardizing the way that you tag your data points. So just the particular units that you want to receive them in. And you will be surprised to see how much time that saves you and how much back and forth that saves as well. So moving on we wanted to add this slide here. It's because we're all guilty of reactive reporting. And so as a sustainability practitioner, you'll see that you're trained to kind of go back and forth and chase people and chase files and chase data. Whereas your work should be much more focused on analysis, on strategy, and on even improving this infrastructure, your data infrastructure. So instead of being reactive and responding only to deadlines, you need to move to focusing more on data itself and data systems themselves. So rather than asking where the data is, who has the files, when do we have to submit this, and kind of scaring people with deadlines, we need to be asking better questions ourselves, such as how does that data flow? What systems does it live in? Where can I automate if I can? What can I improve in the data structure itself? Here we put together some examples of using that 3-layer model, and we've built out kind of a mapping matrix. And we see that if you want to examine your data flow from start to finish, you need to be aware of all of these elements. So let's take an example of a smart meter that lives in your headquarters. So I know that the source is a smart meter. I know that the format I receive it in is a CSV export. I know that the frequency I receive it in is monthly. The ownership, which is very important, and I think we'll touch upon that a bit more later on, is a different department. Let's say it's with facilities, and then I'm accessing that information through an automation, through an API pull. Another example would be a tenant billing system. So that's the source of the information. The format I receive it in is an Excel summary. The frequency I receive it in is a quarterly basis. The owner is the finance department, and the way I receive it is an email attachment. So in the second example, I can already see some pinpoint exactly why I might receive incomplete data or why I might receive data that doesn't serve my purposes. Because if it's an Excel summary, I know that somebody already had went through the process of kind of putting together that table for me. So that creates some room for error there already. And then we have other examples here, but I think we should go through particular cases, which my colleague Piyush will walk us through. But this is just as an example of how we can use that three-layer model to really shape out where problems may arise. But the real stress test is scope 3, because with scope 1 and 2, we're still dealing with internal systems and we're still dealing with internal teams. And so even though it is challenging and you're still having to chase people, it can be manageable. And when you're trying to diagnose the problems, it's easier to diagnose. And even when you're trying to build out a solution, it's easier to do that within your organization. Things really fall apart with scope 3 because you're dealing with much more complex networks. Your data flows not just across departments, but this time across your organizational boundaries. Obviously, if we thought format variation was difficult within our organization, imagine how hard it can be to coordinate in a consistent manner and format across your organization. So we often receive inconsistent data structures, inconsistent formats, missing data, and the back and forth is just, it takes much longer. You also have to rely obviously a lot on manual coordination. And again, sometimes you cannot really predict how long it takes someone outside of your organization to respond. I mean, you cannot predict how long it takes for someone within your organization or even team to respond. So imagine that it's going to be even more challenging if you take that step further and step outside of your organization. And the underlying issue with scope 3 is that you have very, very limited control over what goes on beyond your organization. So a different organization receives a request from you, but they're under no obligation to really provide any information. So this is why it's even more critical to have a robust system where you can clearly see the data flow and you can clearly pinpoint where things go wrong so that you can make this already challenging problem with scope 3 a bit more manageable. And so, yeah, I think I'll hand it over. No, we have a question, and you, whoever wants to ask a question, you can just drop it in the chat, or you can drop it in the question box, and we'll try to respond wherever we see a relevant question. So I have a question here. Someone asked, who owns the data in a multi-site setup? Is it admin, maintenance, or operations? So I'm assuming that this is still talking about the data within one organization that just has different sites. And often case, this is a problem that you face with bigger organization with multiple subsidiaries. And so I want to stress, and I think we'll again touch upon ownership a bit more later on in the webinar, but ownership needs to be role-based and process-backed. That's the bottom line. So don't tie ownership to particular people. So when we think about defining roles and responsibilities, it shouldn't be, oh, what is Najd doing and what's Piyush doing? It should be, what's this role doing and what's the other role doing? It should not be tied to people. It should be tied to a system. And so another thing I want to add here is, particularly when defining that role, you need to set very clear contributor logic, validator logic, and set your reminders based upon that, and set it up in a way that's not impacted by someone moving or someone being on leave or someone leaving the organization. The biggest problem is when you tie information or when it lives with just one specific person. So if they're gone or if they don't respond to you, we're all screwed. Piyush, do you want to add anything
Yeah,
else?
I mean, you covered mostly everything, but so just giving an example of, if you when you use SaaS software like, Zeroe, for example, we work with a role-based access system where we define roles to the users at the source level itself so that they are closer to the data, so they are able to ingest the data into the software. And even for the person who's validating, we try to keep it next close to the source, a role close to the source where they are accountable for the data that's processed. And then it's when a person who's an ESG controller or who's a GHG person in the company is getting the data, it's already validated and submitted at the level of the source itself. So it kind of and it's the roles are defined already in the system, and so those areas which we were talking about, the friction where it builds up, we try to resolve. I mean, you can also try to resolve it by using a system in place where you keep your data sources and close to input close to the source, and validation also close to the source itself.
I
uh,
think we're touching very lightly upon automation, and obviously that's probably everybody's favorite word is automate and
I'm gonna talk
automation.
about it in
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Everybody talks about it. We'll touch upon it a bit more. Obviously, we do encourage automation whenever you can. And in reference to our tool Zero, we we like to deal with the data itself rather than people. But I know that that's not a reality for every organization, especially if you're just starting out your ESG journey. So in the case where you cannot really automate or you don't have a tool that will do that for you, like I said, you need to tie your ownership to roles rather than people and have them very clearly related to the process and not to particular individuals so that the burden is not just on one person or the other.
yeah.
Piyush, I think you'll walk us through specific
Yes.
cases from scope
Yes.
3. I'll
I
hand
will
it over.
try to get them done soon. But we'll discuss three cases here for scope three. I mean, uh, most of you who have been reporting the scope three emissions, these are three areas which you definitely definitely have to report and you deal with. One of them is purchase goods and services. Let's say you have 10 million of annual spend. We have 1,000 plus vendors. Would that be enough for you to calculate your emissions? Probably no, because procurement all often insists that we have the data, but usually it's only base data that's available. The same item appears under different names or codes. Supplier names vary, across legal entities. There are different formats that I mean, if we dive into this much more deeper using the lens of source, structure, and access, the source of the data is usually procurement tools like your e-procurement, then API, any API you have pulled in uh, from your ERPs. Then there is supplier invoices from their portals. Uh, these are the few which we have noticed, but they're still not at the upstream level of it. Upstream, because what we looking at is finding the data which and finding the data that is coming directly from the source, which is not manipulated. When you look at the structures of this data, there is no units at times. There's no material type, and just the total amount that's spent. Uh, One of few red flags that we have noticed in this area is taxonomy mismatch. We see miscellaneous expenses. In times, sometimes there's no category. So how do you basically, when you don't have you have the missing data, it becomes very difficult to uh, calculate your emissions at the end. Uh, the access also is periodically through finance export, and the timing and the format don't usually align with your reporting format and your reporting cycle and sustainability. So that is also something that becomes critical. Um, you don't need more data, even though purchase good data comes from the PO and it is the gold mine of the data. But you need better structure so you can clearly access the data and define the data so that you can use it for the work that you need it for. And let's look at how it shows up in other cases as well, like for example, business travel. If we look at uh,
Mhm.
according to our experience of working in with multiple organizations, we have noticed that source of this HR data is usually source of business travel data comes from HR systems, which is bookings and finance reimbursements. These two feeds do not match at times, and there could be a possibility of double count or a mistrip altogether. Also, we noticed that there is no class of travel that is mentioned, no IAT code available in the system, and if a flight is tagged for economy when they've used business, your emissions will be significantly underreported, which you want to avoid 100%. Let's look at this from a source, structure, and access perspective. The source of the data is, as I discussed, booking tools, HR profiles, card statements. One of the things you need to watch out for in these areas is reimbursements with no matching booking, because this could be miscellaneous expenses, which is there. Uh, then there's structure, which is missing cabin. Sometimes you see missing cabin classes, no standard date. You don't even know the purpose of the travel. Is it their annual leave, or is it their business travel? You're not sure. That's what we have noticed in when we were doing accounting for one of our clients. Uh, there's only vendor name available, and there's not much information, like for example, date, which is required to actually assign the right emissions at the right month. Also, if you look at the exports of these reports, exports happen on different schedules for different with different systems, and sometimes held by one person. And that's what Najas was also discussing, that's where the problem is. It's very dependent on individuals, all the systems, and even internally, the disconnected workflows create data gaps, and that makes emission calculation more challenging for people. And we'll actually dive into one more case, which is waste. You want to
Piyush,
add something?
yeah, I just wanted to add, we chose business travel as a case here because it's scope three, obviously, but it's a case of scope three or a category of scope three where, in theory, all the data should still be within your organization. So you're not really relying on external sources unless they're doing your booking. Then it's a different case. But for the most part, it's a team within your organization that's doing the booking or doing the reimbursements. And analyze it through that three-layer model, you'll see that still a lot of issues arise because of non-conformity across or non-standardization across those different departments. So even internally for scope three, your disconnected workflows can create a lot of issues.
Yeah, this is something you can practice now. I mean, in terms of when you're looking at your booking, uh, your travel business travels, you can actually implement this three-layered model and execute now itself for your systems. And one of the most common, or cases is waste logs are common but rarely structured to support emissions or any other circularity reports. uh, when we look at these issues with the waste data, waste logs usually track the volume per bin. Emissions and circularity requires material and disposal methods. That's very important. Data often arrives as sometimes a PDF document from the vendor or a scan ticket, which can be a difficult uh, task, because without knowing what's in the bin and or where it went, you can't assign the right emission factors. And if you want to dive deeper into this from a source, structure, and access perspective, we look at the source of the waste. It usually comes from the facility logs, your vendor portals, your Bolisati reports, your Tadweer reports, your manifests coming from your waste companies. Uh, they have multiple location and inconsistent tracking format. So if you have a entity, an organization where an entity is supplying their waste to Tadweer, while the other is supplying their to a different organization, the formats won't match, and there'll be different structures. So there's some places will have no material code, no transparent method of disposal, no, and just probably volume per bin. And sometimes what we have seen is just skips we get. That's all, like a PDF bill with like 10 skips data, and how do you make sense out of it? So missing critical categories makes it more challenging to get the right information to implement the right emission factors to your pro- to your data set. Another issue that or another area that we need to look at is the access. So we have monthly PDF uploads in the system, but the formats are irregular and again tied to one person in most cases. So what we want you to take away from here is what you track, which is the bin volume, is not equal to what you need, which is your material and disposal method. Without fixing this means making structure appear where data is born, not where it's reported. And without restructuring how data is collected, accurate emission calculations remain difficult. Nudge will now help translate this diagnosis into concrete solution that you can implement in next few weeks to actually improve and strengthen your data systems. Over to you, Nudge.
Perfect. So before we move on, I see another relevant question here. And by the way, we'll leave some time towards the end for a more dedicated Q&A session. So if we don't address your question here, just rest assured that we will try to address it towards the end. But this question says that our departments all use different formats. I'm assuming like different units, different categorizations. And they say that procurement has its own Excel, HR has another Excel, and none of them match. How do we align this? I think the key thing to focus on, which can be very overwhelming, is thinking that you have to address this all at once. And my advice to sustainability practitioners would be, don't try to centralize everything overnight. I think you should build wrappers over or around what exists already. So try to create more structured templates for those people. And even within those templates, if you can kind of control the drop down fields, the naming logic. So start by controlling certain elements. Don't try to change everything all at once. Don't try to get all of these different departments to change their practices overnight. That can be overwhelming for everybody involved. Just try to build over time and control what you can now or what's urgent now. Thank you, Piyush. And I think this gives you guys a good kind of idea or insight into the problems. We're all aware of the problems, but hopefully in your exercise and as you think of more data points, you'll see that if you use source structure access, you'll be able to break down which ones need more focus, which ones do we start with, or are more critical, or are even within our control. So now we've talked a lot about the problems. We'd like to propose certain things in a form of a solution. So how do we move on from that mapping exercise to actually strengthening our data systems? And here I'm talking about existing data systems, or even if you are a company that's just now starting out on their ESG or GHG calculations journey. I think the first thing you start with is mapping out your data flow. Again, use that model that we gave you, and I think you were able to do that in that exercise we started out with. Try to understand, where does the data flow begin until it gets to you and your department, what happens to it, who contributed to it. Map out that entire flow and try to be as objective. Don't let that mapping process overwhelm you, because then you can move on to the next step, which is diagnosing the problems or diagnosing the friction. So use that 3-layer model in order to pinpoint exactly what is going wrong and which layer are things breaking in. Is it that the source of information is not reliable? Is it manual or inconsistent? Or is it because it's not formatted in a way that's useful to you? Or is it because you're relying on receiving this information in your inbox, knowing that it's been manipulated and knowing because of human error, it might not be accurate even. Next, we would like to talk about defining ownership. obviously we all talk about roles and responsibilities. Let's define roles and responsibilities, and you may have gone through a million different exercises to kind of try to define these roles and responsibilities across different departments. It is a very, very difficult exercise. And again, what we want to stress here is do not tie the roles and responsibilities, or do not tie ownership to people or individuals. Don't say Piyush is doing this forever. You need to tie it to actual roles, and what you need to define is what does that role constitute, what goes into that. And
And one more thing to that, document it. When you're defining it,
yes,
please document it. It's very important.
absolutely. So define the roles and responsibilities, and define, again here, I think it goes hand in hand with the ownership aspect, is define the frequency and stick to that. So, and another thing to keep in mind here is when you're asking people to do something or you're defining a role for them, don't be unrealistic. Don't start with asking for data on like a bi-weekly or a monthly frequency if you know that that's not doable. If they're just now starting to understand what ESG is or what GHG is and why your organization is even requiring these disclosures, do not be unrealistic in your expectations, and involve them in the decision-making process as well when you define the roles and responsibilities. And we wanted to stress on ownership here. Don't, or actually rather, do explain to these different departments or different stakeholders that at the end of the day, it's not the sustainability practitioner or the sustainability team that owns this data. It is not just our data to own or our data to manage, and we're not the sole people responsible for this data. And stress on the fact that it is shared responsibility across the department and across the organization. So if you're involved in that data flow in any way, then it is your responsibility and you share ownership in that process as well. Next, we want to talk about standardizing inputs. And again, this is super, super, super key to your system, whatever system you're building, or if you're improving your system, standardize your inputs and lock down consistent structures and methods. And like Piyush said, make sure this is documented. If you need to explain to people why it needs to be in a certain format, do that however many times it takes, but your system should not have variable formats. Your formats should be consistent, should not be changed, so that you're assured that by the time it gets to you as a sustainability practitioner, it has not been manipulated and you're getting data as close to the source where it originated as possible. And then we added lightly automate here because, again, we realized that automate is probably everybody's favorite buzzword at this point. But we wanted to say that unless you have gone through all of these other factors that we've already discussed, unless you mapped out the flow and diagnosed the problem, defined ownership and standardized inputs, automation means nothing. So obviously you might think that it will, but unless you don't have your process um, um, in a solid manner and in a standardized manner, it will not mean anything for it to be automated, because there are still going to be issues with variable formats, or you're not going to know who to auto or systems to automate or integrate into. So only get to the automation bit once you're happy and comfortable and you've actually tried and tested all of these other steps. And what good looks like, or what makes your data audit ready. And again, this is very useful to keep in mind when you're either building out a system from scratch or if you have an existing system within your organization. So what does good look like, and what makes my system helpful, and what makes my data audit ready? So there are 5 key elements here, probably more, but these are the 5 key elements we've seen. The number one element would be to design your system in a way that allows for new metrics to be added without disruption. So allow for modular design. Let's say you're an organization that's just now starting out your ESG or GHG journey. It is not realistic, and nobody, even the GRI standard, will not expect you to have all of your disclosures all at once or all of your categories. For example, you probably won't start with scope 3 from the get-go. So you will need a system that's designed in a way that allows you to add metrics as your kind of tracking matures. You can add things, you can remove things seamlessly. Number two, transparency, which is, I think, obvious to everybody, but everything that happens across your data flow from origins until your analysis and until you report your emissions should be very clear and visible to everybody. If any data manipulation occurs, and manipulation is not in a bad way, but I think if any changes are done at any point to that data, if you change your unit or if you change a classification, your system should be able to capture that and capture exactly what happened and who did that change. Shared ownership. I think we've talked about this already, but your system should allow for cross-functional collaboration with clear roles and responsibilities. And just going back to what Piyush said, for example, in Zeroe, what we've done is that we've tried to go to the source of the information as much as possible. So if you can get the raw data in its most original format and you bypass kind of any other Excel sheets or any other exports that are done to that data, that's best. But if you are in a case where you still have to rely on different teams or different stakeholders, then make sure that that process is a shared, or the ownership of that process is shared. If they're involved in the data flow, they're involved in the ownership. Next is that your system should be durable. So again, we cannot stress this item enough. So your system should not be disrupted if somebody leaves your organization. If one person from the facilities team leaves the organization, your system and reporting cycle should not be disrupted. Even if you yourself, as a sustainability practitioner, decide to leave the organization or you go on leave, that flow and that reporting should not be disrupted. And I think that's one key aspect that relying on a system rather than people makes it a bit easier not for your data flow not to be disrupted by any changes either to staff or system. The last point here is interoperable. Build a system that works across different standards, such as GRI, GHG protocol, ISSP, CSRD. And I know today we didn't really talk about the data itself and what goes into every category or every ESG disclosure. I think we can cover that in upcoming webinars, so stay tuned. But what the key aspect here when designing a system is that it should work across different standards, and you should not be repeating the work for every report that you have to submit. So there are two key elements here. A is that some certain standards are related to one another. So GRI and GHG protocol are perfect examples of this, where you use similar data in GRI when calculating emissions that you do in GHG protocol. So set up your system in a way where you don't have to repeat the process twice for these different reports. You can just use what you did for GHG protocol to fulfill your GRI reporting requirements. But on the other hand, certain standards actually deal with different aspects of ESG data. So some of them might deal with financial aspects of ESG. So your system should be set up in a manner that allows for that as well. It should work across different systems and different standards, rather. And we want to stress the fact that you don't need to start with a perfect system. You just need to build a system that can be improved over time or that you can build upon over time. And the goal is to have a solid foundation. And the goal is to have enough visibility into that process, as well as the problems that arise in the different layers and aspect of that data flow, that you can actually build and improve it as your understanding and your strategies actually mature in the organization. So yeah, we'd like to end on a few key messages here. A, that the quality of your reporting, planning, and insights depend on the quality of your data systems. Again, that cannot be stressed enough. And we want to say that, like you did in the exercise that we started with, you should start by mapping one data stream, and you can start with the most critical data streams that you have. So if you're doing GHG protocol, for example, start with scope 1 and 2. And if you're doing ESG disclosures, start with those that are actually relevant to your organization and where you can, if you were to make changes, will have the biggest impact on the organization. Once you've mapped out the flow and you've diagnosed the problems, you can start by strengthening one layer. So let's say we're just starting out our ESG journey. Like I told you, you might have problems across all the three layers. So source, structure, and access. That doesn't mean that you should jump start and try to fix everything all at once. No, start by strengthening the weakest layer that you have identified, the one that's giving you the most trouble. And doing that and building upon that over time as your own understanding of what's required matures is the momentum that's required to build a robust and sustain and building a sustainability infrastructure as well as system that can be improved over time. And that's all anybody really is asking of you. You don't have to be perfect, and you shouldn't have to feel the burden of the reporting cycle every time as the sustainability team, but build a system that helps you improve over time and improve incrementally. Anything to add, Piyush?
Yeah, no, Naj, there's a few questions. I think one of the questions which I would like to read out to you right now connects to to this whole thing. How do you future-proof a sustainability data system when regulatory expectations and standards are still evolving? I think Michael has sent this question our way. What do you think about this?
I think, Michael, just going back to this slide, we already discussed kind of the different components that should go into your system. One of them, and the key component here that deals directly with your question, is modular design. You shouldn't build
Yeah,
a you shouldn't build a static system. Build a system that can be changed and improved as regulatory standards evolve. Because we all know this, we get different regulations, we get different policies that impact our reporting all the time, even multiple times during a reporting period. So build your system in a way that makes it seamless to add disclosures or remove disclosures, or when dealing with GHG, for example, to add or swap out emission factors seamlessly as well, while keeping everything very transparent and visible. So all the changes are visible. And
I mean,
also, I think it's also, sorry, Piyush, I think the interoperable aspect or element feeds into that as well. Because while building or when selecting a tool, make sure you select one that actually works across different standards. So not just GRI or GHG protocol, but that could work for financial disclosures or governance disclosures as well.
yeah, I mean, well done. You've covered almost everything which was there. I mean, yes, can have modular systems. Their automations help, but when you use softwares that are evolving and allows that ability to scale, that really makes your job easy. So that's one thing I just wanted to add. There is one more question for Mohammed Khalfa that I've responded already on the chat itself. And I think you had already taken the question from Renan.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Any other question that you may have?
Lauren, maybe help us out if there are any questions because I cannot see the chat
No,
box.
I'll tell you. It's okay. On waste, there's one more question from Saravana. Uh, on waste collection is in residential properties, waste collection is centralized. How we can sort material types? Also, can we refer service providers recycling percentage or on our waste generation as a reduction on total? Uh, do you want me to?
Yeah, I think you should take that because you discussed waste.
Yes, okay. So in residential properties, when the waste collection is centralized, uh, we what we do in practical in on the site is we do an audit. In case if it's not already there, the information doesn't exist, we have to do a waste audit in terms of figuring out what waste goes and what's the percentage of that distribution. And yes, you can also refer service providers recycling percentage on a waste generation, but it has to be related to your data. You cannot use a general percentage. You have to ask your supplier to provide how much percentage of my waste has been recycled to be able to actually accommodate this data in your systems.
Cool. We're doing really
Yeah.
well on time as well.
Yes, I think we have 5 minutes more to go. If there's any other questions, please drop it in the question section. And if you have any comments for us, please send it us on a chat. We would love to hear your feedbacks.
And Piyush and I are available on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to us for any other questions, as well as please visit our website. Book a demo with us to show how a tool actually helps you or actually takes into consideration all of these different elements. We didn't want today's session to be all about our particular tool, but obviously we designed Zero with all of these factors in mind. So all of these issues that arise, all of the different kind of requirements from different standards that we work with, how do we ensure ownership is actually shared, how we ensure transparency, and how do we have visibility into what happens or how data is manipulated. That's all taking into account when designing Zero, because Zero is designed for people like you and I.
Yeah.
But you can find out more on our website. We wanted to actually leave that out of the discussion today. But obviously, if you're interested, we're more than happy to walk you through all of that in particular, or how Zero solves those issues. Um,
And you
Again,
find me and Najd on LinkedIn, and if you want our email addresses, we could send you a message as well. Uh, if there's any other question, you can also ask us. And yeah, that's about it. Do you want to add anything else? Or
I think we've covered almost everything. Really, thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciated it, and Piyush and I, kind of spoke from personal experience. We've gone through this process. We understand that it can be very very frustrating, and you feel like the burden is all on you, and you're having to chase people. So we've been there, and we understand your frustration, and we hope what we provided today was helpful. You have that kind of work or the worksheet that we provided towards the beginning of the webinar that you can use anytime with any data point, and use the three-layer model to identify the issues, and then keep in mind what we spoke about when designing your sustainability systems.
yeah, if you want to share the sheet with us, so that if you need some help with the sheet where we can help you, we are happy to,
Yes.
assist you in it. Please reach out. Feel free to reach out to us. We are here to make sure that we can provide you all the information so that you can strengthen your data systems as well. Yeah.
One last thing I want to add here is if you're an organization that's just now starting out its ESG/GHG journey, we actually published some content that helps you with what to expect when trying to measure your scope 1 and 2, let's say, emissions for the first time. So check out the Zero LinkedIn page itself. We always try to share content there that's helpful for people who are just starting out, or even for people who are more mature in their sustainability journey. So you'll find a lot of resources there and on our website. Right.
Thank you so much. Well
Have a
done.
great day, everybody. Well done, Piyush.